Welcome to the ZoomInfo Labs podcast. I'm Ben Salzman.
And I'm Millie Beetham. Today, we're excited to have our very own Andrew Riesenfeld on the pod.
Andrew is ZoomInfo's COO of Go-to-Market and a seasoned expert in the field with a career spanning DocuSign, Responsys, Thompson Reuters, where he's led high-impact teams driving major go-to-market transformations.
Andrew shares his insights on architecting go-to-market systems, the importance of signal-based selling, and why unifying first and third-party data is critical for go-to-market success. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the ZoomInfo Labs podcast. I'm Ben Salzman.
And I'm Millie Beetham.
Today we have a very special guest, the COO of Go-to-Market for ZoomInfo, the man himself, Andrew Riesenfeld.
Thank you for having me. This is a treat to be here with two of my favorite people.
We are so excited. Long time coming. It is difficult to get on your schedule, but now that we have you, we're excited to dive into all things go-to-market, AI, your journey and your career, as well as where you think the industry and ZoomInfo is heading. So, there's so much to cover.
History.
Yes. Before we jump in, we want to talk a little bit about your career journey and your time at DocuSign and transitioning to ZoomInfo, but maybe for the audience who's not already familiar with you, give the once-over on who you are, where you've come from.
Yeah, Andrew Riesenfeld, born and raised in the Bay Area, and as COO of Go-to-Market, I'm responsible for designing and optimizing, bringing products to market, driving revenue growth, and helping our customers and enabling our customers to consistently win. I've been fortunate to be a ZoomInfo customer prior to coming here, and we'll talk a little bit about in the journey here. But what's most exciting is the ability to use a lot of rich intelligence to modernize your go-to-market in a very competitive environment. And so what really drew me to ZoomInfo was being that customer first and the transformation that we drove at DocuSign.
Awesome. We're going to spend a lot of time on that. If we can go back even farther, one of the things that I loved about you when I first met you is I found out you were a star baseball player at the University of Virginia. Can you just talk about maybe your time at UVA, your time on the baseball team? I think you batted .438, 12 home runs, 46 RBIs. That's what I tell people. But if you could talk about the sort of transition into tech and some of the stuff early career before DocuSign.
Yeah, 100%. And, we have a long history. If you go back to the Digital Garage, which is a setup for incubators in San Francisco on Market Street. And we had a mutual friend, a gentleman by the name of Zach Cass, who was very early at
it's called OpenAI. Have you heard of it?
And he said, hey, look, you two, you both love to whiteboard. You both are sort of cutting edge in what you're trying to accomplish. And I remember, I think we came in and we started geeking out. And you were doing some super cool cutting edge around 2010 of really using data to make things more personalized and more relevant. And I think that's where, 12 years running now, our friendship began, but also our desire to do more and make it more relevant for the customers. Yes, the baseball thing, I was fortunate to be able to play the game of baseball. It's a game of failure, and that taught me a lot of lessons in life. When that finished, after playing at the University of Virginia, I ended up actually doing what I hope many others do, which is doing some soul searching and letting my soul catch up with me, which was spending 9 months traveling around the world. And I got to see almost 30 different countries across Europe, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, New Zealand, and Australia. And it ended up being about $14 a day when you add up all the math. So not a lot of money, but a lot of learnings and fun. And then I ran out of money in Australia and I decided to come home and live at home. And what I wanted to do was get into an environment where I could cut my teeth and grind and build and make some good money. And, I always felt like those that worked in finance seemed to make a lot of money. And the work ethic that I had, if you could blend it with sales, was a perfect combination. And so I ended up going into finance in sales and ended up building my own book of business by finding that uncommon commonality of people that had graduated from the University of Virginia and essentially making about 300 cold calls a day in trying to convince them that the institution that I worked for would be an institution that could help them grow their assets. And from that, made the move out of finance into fintech with a company called Thompson Reuters. a big conglomerate, data provider, competes with Bloomberg, and ended up spending a bunch of time there working with financial institutions, predominantly investor relations, to better understand their investor base. And then from there, ended up meeting one of my biggest mentors, a guy by the name of Scott Ulrich. And that was really the entry into tech. He was the COO of a company called Responsys, which was a B2B2C marketing automation engine that helped retailers and travel companies essentially personalize and automate hundreds of millions, if not billions, of emails at scale. And he really inspired me to think bigger about creating a category and the vision behind using technology to drive real scale. And so we had a lot of fun building that out. That was the early days of Oracle starting to build a marketing automation cloud and Salesforce building a marketing cloud. And we scaled that company. We took it public, then we scaled it, and then we sold it to Oracle. And that was when Oracle bought us, and Salesforce bought a company by the name of ExactTarget. Marketo was in the mix, a company that was doing similar things. And then from there, we all went to a company called DocuSign, and we created a category there. And that's where I got sort of a sense of the power of ZoomInfo, and was inspired by Henry and the work that he does. And so it's been a wonderful journey since then in tech.
I love it. It should be noted, you all sold it to Oracle for over $1 billion, right?
We did.
Incredible outcome. And shout out to Scott, amazing leader. Learned a lot from him myself from afar. At DocuSign, a big part of your experience there was driving go-to-market transformation. What were some of the key lessons that you learned there?
Yeah. It's interesting. I think it's applicable for a lot of companies. If you think about DocuSign is predominantly an inbound PLG, SMB, at the time, single product organization. And if you think about people, process, and technology, and you think about what got DocuSign to $1 billion in revenue, it certainly wasn't what was going to get us to $2 billion and $5 billion in revenue. And re-architecting the jobs to be done, the people, the skills, re-architecting the processes, and re-architecting the systems to support that is a radical transformation that needs to come top down. And so you go from a world where it's predominantly PLG, SMB, inbound, and single product, and all of a sudden there's this desire, and it's more than, hey, let's just go up market, to go from inbound to also be outbound, to go from being SMB to supporting multi-entity, multinational hierarchies across big global organizations in the enterprise. And then moving from a world where you're a single product, which people knew us for, which was e-signature, and creating a category, which was the ability to prepare agreements, sign the agreements, which people knew us for, act on those agreements, and manage those agreements. And what's really interesting is when we went public, we had a TAM of about 25 billion. And very quickly, we were able to create a $100 billion TAM based on those other set of components. And so the transformation itself, which I think we'll talk about today, required a lot of cross-functional alignment, prioritization, bringing in people that have been there and done that to help us get to the next phase. But it's been a great journey to see what DocuSign has been able to go from that 1 billion to 3 billion. And when I joined, it was great. We were about 150 million, and we took it to, call it 2.5, 3 billion before joining ZoomInfo.
Amazing. So we've talked a bit about sort of your career progression and the history there. Let's turn a little bit. I feel like, at least from you and I working together, your leadership style is very operational, at the same time, very big picture.
Yeah.
How do you manage both of those? What are sort of your first principles around maintaining that stuff?
Yeah, well, I learned a lot from you, Millie, and our conversations are really helpful in thinking about the future. I think, Scott, who I mentioned earlier, always said, you have to get people to believe what you believe. They need purpose. And so I think it's a blend of having this big vision strategy, which I think is easy when you're working with someone like Scott or someone like Henry here at ZoomInfo, where they've got a great vision. And then it becomes easier to get aligned to that vision on where the future is going. And so I think you start with setting the strategy and the vision for what we want to go accomplish. And then knowing myself and knowing that I like order and I don't like a lot of chaos, it's mapping back the individual's goals to that big vision. But they've got to believe what you believe so they have purpose. And I believe that purpose-driven engagement is one of the greatest gifts you can find. And then from there, investing in those individuals with the upskilling required for the jobs to be done. I think everybody should have some sort of IDP that allows them to understand what they have today and what they need to develop. That could be coaching, that could be a number of things. And then from there, it's holding them accountable and giving them stretch jobs. I think, a lot of individuals want to be challenged. And I think feedback's a gift as long as it's timely and actionable. And so if you can incorporate that big picture vision that aligns back to the executive team, and then from there, building that work back plan that helps them incrementally get there, hold them accountable, and provide them feedback along the way, it's a win-win for all.
Yeah, great.
And you've gone from when you first joined SVP of Business Development onto a wider role in go-to-market. Talk to us about that transition and maybe a little bit into the work that you've done around ZoomInfo's SDR Academy and some of the programs that you stood up as part of that.
Yeah. Henry is a very convincing person. And over time, I think we agreed that there was an exciting opportunity to partner together. And a lot of that stemmed from a lot of the work that we did at DocuSign, leveraging ZoomInfo. And I think where we started was there's a workforce, the sales development organization and the enablement organization, which as an operator and as a practitioner that had used ZoomInfo, those were two of the greatest places to start in transforming the sales development program and transforming the enablement program to operationalize these best practices across the field. And so that's where we started. And then from there, it became more of an opportunity for me to assume the responsibility of our revenue operations function and our PMO organization so that we could drive cross-functional alignment, prioritization, and then execute across a lion's share of our people, the sales development organization, and influence through the enablement organization, the field, the processes, which is the systems and the processes associated to how the operators and practitioners work, and then the PMO function, which was to sort of remove the noise and get really focused on the vital few and remove the trivial many, so that we would make a real dent into the priorities that we set out to achieve.
I just want to recap that again, because I think one of the things that we want to go into is talk a little bit about like the future of go-to-market, the future of operations broadly as a function. And I think like really important to recap, Andrew, you just said you oversee revenue operations, SDR, enablement, and PMO. And I think probably for many listeners, right, their revenue operations or their COO org looks very different and may have some or all of those functions or some completely different, like a combination of those things. And I think that's one of the topics that we'll dive into a little bit more about, like generally how broad that is, how difficult it can be to really understanding like exactly what an ops practitioner does or cares about, et cetera, especially if you're sort of targeting them, right, and trying to sell your products to them. But also the fact that that is functionally, I think, shifting and evolving. And there's a lot of conversation around that is going to change sort of the fabric of software broadly as we move into the next 5 years. So we're going to kind of get into some of that, but I think it's just a really great thing to recap. Like those are functionally, if you think about them, they all make sense together.
Totally.
But they're all extremely different in practice, right? The structures of those teams, the skills, like you said, building and developing talent in all of those areas looks very different. And I think there's like a real red thread around the fact that because they're so different, right? How do you parse, right, those parts of that organization if you're thinking about selling your products or leveraging data to support them and your go-to-market teams broadly?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And you asked a question, Ben, that I don't think I touched on, which was whether it was the SDR Academy or the ZoomInfo Academy. And I think in these transformations that unfold, there's a real reskilling and upskilling the workforce for the jobs to be done. And I think it's a constant, always on mentality of what's required to bring people along in their journey. I think about like Salesforce, what they did with Trailblazer community, or what HubSpot's done with the marketing community. And what they've really done is built agency into this workforce that is obsessed with their respective products. And if I think about the SDR Academy, the reason we started there was predominantly because we had a junior workforce that wanted to do more, to do bigger, to do better, and arguably just needed a curriculum, much like many of us went to school and had some sort of academic curriculum where they could learn at a pace that allowed them to build the skills for the jobs to be done. A good example is in the SMB, you're not multi-threading very much. You tend to have a single decision maker. If it's inbound, it's somebody that raised their hand and was interested in your product and therefore would buy your product. As you evolve, you've got to do better discovery. You've got to map it back to a methodology or a deal qualification criteria like MEDDIC and force management. And then you've got to be able to expand the use case from predominantly sales into back office and having strategic discussions and data fluency around a golden record, as an example. These are fundamentally different skills and learnings that you've got to instill. And so we started with the SDR Academy. I think it's been a great success. But then we took it into the ZoomInfo Academy because there's no difference between a SMB seller who has aspirations of becoming an enterprise seller and needing to be equipped for the job to be done of one call closes into a world where we're multi-threading, we're doing deep discovery, and the deal takes not 3 days, but potentially 3 years. That's a radical transformation. And what's been great is the investment that ZoomInfo has made into this employee base and the commitment, much like the Trailblazer community, into building world-class sales programs that are good for ZoomInfo, great for our customers, but more importantly, great for the employees as they build their career.
I think that that sort of ripple effect of like building and educating internally through an enablement program or through an operations program or an academy like this, that then thinking about how that pays dividends to your broader market as those people move on.
Totally.
Like, I think it's something that we know or we understand, but like when enablement was penned, for example, like years back, it's not like that was the core goal or the core objective. But now you as an organization, as a brand, can do that and not only see immediately internal impact, but sort of the long tail of impact as those folks go out and more broadly sort of educate beyond.
100%. In fact, like hopefully, legacy is an odd word, but if I look back on the ability to shape the minds and the careers of a lot of folks, if I look back to Responsys, I think half of Sixth Sense's leadership team came through the sales development program that we built at Responsys. If I look at, the DocuSign team that we built, all senior leaders at pretty big companies. And if I think about ZoomInfo, I have no doubt that those that we're impacting are going to be future leaders of major organizations. And that's a great gift that you can instill in them, but they're also hungry for it. And I think what's been cool, whether it's the podcast you all do, or just in general, the way people consume, it used to be by textbook, and not everybody's going to learn through a textbook. And so the incorporation of different modalities, we talk about AI in this session, but Notebook LM is a great way for you to ingest information and then have it talk to you through, an NPR type podcast. That's actually a great way for me to learn, whether I'm on the road or whether I'm driving somebody to practice. It's just a different way to consume information where you're not beholden to a textbook. And so I think the democratization of availability for that type of learning has just unleashed a whole new world of opportunity for so many people that were stuck in this sort of, textbook style learning.
Yeah. Wow. We've just like commented on like a bunch of things. Yeah. It's like one piece is like, okay, if you build up your right, like if you see an opportunity to teach your people, right, how to sell your products or how to do the thing that you, right, are bringing to market, that's one piece of it, right? You're also teaching them their function, right, within, whether that's within sales, or I'm starting to see marketing enablement programs pop up, like teaching marketers to be marketers in the practice of going to work. Then there's the element of like how that sort of like then translate and becomes external brand building in addition to external people development, right? You build this like beautiful network of sort of mentorships and leaders over time. And then you're also talking about how there's such brilliance in AI enabling that education to be so much more tangible, so much more impactful because you can activate it through multiple modalities. Like there's so much there to unpack. I feel like one of the questions that I was really excited to ask you today is like, in terms of like the big challenge in the sort of ops center.
Yeah.
Like for you today at ZoomInfo or in the past, like what is the core challenge that you're consistently having to overcome, and maybe what's different in the past versus today?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a fundamental shift from, I want to say 2011 to 2023. And there was a great book that a gentleman by the name of Aaron Ross wrote, who wrote Predictable Revenue. Mm-hmm. And he went to Mark Benioff and said, I'll create a $100 million predictable revenue engine into the enterprise. And its most fundamental level, he was sort of, breaking out the inbound motion from the outbound motion, because if you have somebody focused on doing both, the path of least resistance is the inbound motion. And so people would gravitate there when we know the ASPs and we know that the deal cycles are longer and ASPs are higher. And I think that worked in a world where we had low interest rate environment. I think that companies were less focused on managing and scrutinizing their budget. And we saw this plethora of technologies emerge that were point solutions intended to solve pretty fundamental issues across an organization. And I think a lot of revenue operations functions are dealing with a lot of process debt and a lot of technical debt that is an overhang and arguably challenging to unwind. And so, I think there's this philosophy for a long time that, the spray and pray worked. You hire 100 SDRs and you give them 1,000 accounts and you send X number of outreach sequences or sales loss sequences, or back in the early days, tout out sequences. And it would lead to, shout out TK. TK's a great guy.
Guest on this season.
Yeah, wow. Guest on this season. Yeah, TK and I go way back. But I think that model has completely shifted. And unfortunately for a lot of organizations that look at productivity, it's, the connect rates have dropped materially. And so we need you to do more activity. And then we're looking for a quick fix to solve the gap that we have in sort of, pipeline creation, et cetera, everything else. And so send more. And that is arguably the worst thing you could do. And so I think RevOps in particular has this really exciting opportunity, especially with the focus post-ZERP of companies being accountable for profitability. I mean, it was this radical transformation for companies that thought they had product market fit and didn't have product market fit, but had a ton of venture capital funding, and all of a sudden are on the hook to get to profitability without a product that had real product market fit. And so you've got this plethora of applications that we've got to unwind. You've got a plethora of these outdated processes that are not defined. And I think RevOps is in this pole position to come in and help define the processes for the respective motion, and be absolutely maniacally focused and almost operationally ruthless on the core set of technologies that are enterprise grade that can scale for the future. And I think that these point solutions, I think there's going to be just thousands of zombie companies out there that just failed to produce any kind of real product market fit, and aren't growing, aren't profitable, and have some interesting IP, but the real onus is on RevOps to go and understand what is the job to be done, what are the processes that get us there fastest, and what's the technology that's required to support it, and almost coming in with a first principle mindset of everything we have may be fundamentally broken, and starting over and saying, what is this purpose technology that we need to get there? And that's an exciting opportunity.
I'm so glad somebody said it, because I really do think this season is so much about this sort of transformation that we're going through. And I think what we haven't yet heard is, what if we just have to start over?
Yeah.
That's okay. It's but somebody needs to be somebody needs to own that and say, hey, we've kind of got to roll all of this back and we're going to start from scratch. We're at a different point, right, in the world of software broadly. And some of these things that we've either duct taped together or we're trying to make work, I think the hardest thing you can do as a leader today is to come in and actually have to say, like, call it like you see it and say, we're going to start again.
I think it's funny you say that's okay. I think it's like, it's a fact, but I don't know if it's okay for a lot of companies. They're going to struggle. I mean, it's going to be necessary.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. It's a great
so hard. Like, is it okay?
I mean, I think what Andrew just said is it is okay, but there aren't going to be as many people who are willing to speak up and take the risk to put that on the desk of some executive.
Totally.
Right?
Totally.
So let's take that sort of into your, context today, whether it be, I'll let you choose, enablement or SDR or revenue operations. Like, how do you see AI transforming any or all of those functions into the future?
Yeah, I think it's embedded systemically in everything we do. I think it can't be an afterthought. It has to be at the front and center of everything we're thinking about and everything we're doing. I think, if you take like a simple example, we have so many, this is more company-wide, but if you think about how many people end up being on meetings, it's ridiculous. It's expensive. There's a lack of decision-making authority. And we were using AI recently to help us all just understand our schedules and how we prioritize our time. And is it mapping back to the vision? Is it mapping back to the goals? Is it mapping back to how we spend our time? And so we, as an example, to drive, more capacity across less people, we all did this exercise where we looked at our schedules. We downloaded all the information from those schedules. We categorized it with ChatGPT. And then from there, we uploaded it in Notebook LM. And we basically did these podcasts where we explained how we spend our time. And we were really critical of each other. And we did that within 48 hours. And what was really cool about it is we realized that we had 60% of our time, we were always overlapping with multiple people in meetings where we didn't need each other. And so very quickly, we were able to get that time back and reallocate it elsewhere where we were falling short in terms of needing extra capacity to go work on those goals. From a product perspective, like, it's insane how much is being invested into not only ZoomInfo, but across the board in terms of the speed at which we can extract information, infer insights, and then make it actionable. Like, a great example is the account planning process. Like, if I had to go to a meeting, and we did a great skit on it at ZoomInfo, where these two people had to prepare for a meeting, and in one meeting, the person was doing the laborious, go into Salesforce, find the notes, look at the outreachy sequences, and extract that information to be informed. The other is using a, amalgamation of information, first party and third party, and clicking a prompt, and the prompt spits out everything you need to know about the history of the relationship, the products that they buy, the relationships that you have, and does it in seconds. And so, like, it's embedded in just about everything that we are doing. I guess the last example is we were a late adopter from a forecasting perspective in RevOps around forecasting. And we were using manual spreadsheets to continue to track. And we're a pretty big company that's pretty modern. And we recently made the move to an application that is essentially doing all of that for you. And we moved off of spreadsheets. It took 1.5 years to convince the organization that we needed to do this. And now we've got this great visibility into what the projected outcomes are from a forecasting perspective, not 1 month, not 2 months, but 2 quarters ahead. And it really allows us to be nimble and agile in terms of addressing issues well before they're issues after the fact. And that level of prescription and insight is super transformational in terms of where we need to go.
On the topic of, in an AI-driven world, traditional CRM feels like it's going to have its turn in the barrel here around, like, how are we going to use it? How does it interface with sort of this other universe of data that's out there? Is CRM still relevant the same way? How do you think about this new data foundation as part of go-to-market success?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Look, Salesforce is a $300 billion plus company. They're here to stay. They're a great company, great partner to ZoomInfo. I think what has been challenging is that it wasn't purpose-built for the modern go-to-market. And it's a messy CRM with a lot of different data. You've got duplicate data, you've got orphan data, and it's not in a position where it's actually actionable, which is why you have most of your reps out there working through a Google Sheet for managing their territories. what Salesforce has done very well is they built the App Exchange, and it's a remarkably sticky product. And what they've done is they become sort of the ecosystem of applications that's built on this arguably messy CRM data. And so I think like the future is going to look very different. I think that the CRM becomes a set of data, but there's lots of different sets of data. There's first-party data, there's third-party data, second-party data. And so it becomes a data point, but not the data point. And I think that unlocking, like a great example at DocuSign was we had a purpose-built CRM that was 17 years old. It was built again for an inbound SMB and single product motion. And we needed to completely transform that. And so our CRM instance was fundamentally broken for the job to be done. And so we teamed up, me and our CIO, Shanti Iyer, who said, hey, look, I think that the way in which the data is constructed is fundamentally flawed. And we had Dun & Bradstreet serving as the unique identifier, but it was purpose built to serve the needs of the back office, credit worthiness, is this a legal entity? But go-to-market doesn't sell off of a legal entity. They sell off this concept of go-to-market groups and audiences that are purpose-built for the front office. And so CRM is not purpose-built for really either of those things. And so what we did is we used the hierarchy data from ZoomInfo to essentially create the first golden record for front office, which means a unique identifier that is purpose-built for go-to-market teams to append and enrich lots of other data attributes that drives relevancy at scale. And I think that you cannot do that if you start with a messy CRM data. And so you have to make a fundamental shift that says you can have a multi-data vendor environment. I think that's healthy, but you do need a unique record, and you need a golden record for the front office so that you can master the data associated to it with different survivorship and workflow rules that allow it to maintain its integrity so that you don't have 17 Cisco accounts, of which 16 of them are orphan accounts or duplicate accounts. And then how would you even be able to take action on those accounts if they're the wrong one that your field is working, but your marketing team is showing display ads to? That's radically different. And so I think CRM is not going anywhere. I don't think MAP is going anywhere. I don't think HCM is going anywhere. Those are SaaS solutions that have been democratized in the cloud. But I think for go-to-market teams, CRM is a component. It is not the component. And I think there's a world where you have this virtual CRM that is not beholden to this messy data that is a plethora of dumping ground for information that serve the needs of the company that was, but not the company that's going to be. Yeah.
Andrew, can you speak to, like, once you have that golden record or you have that virtual CRM construct, like what can you all of a sudden do in terms of operationalizing that data that you couldn't necessarily do as well before?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think you two do it as well as anybody. And I think a lot of our customers are doing a really good job of it. But if you have that unique ID, then you can essentially snap to the signal economy, which is massive, billions of signals that are out there, and they can all map back to that unique ID. So for example, if somebody was to go out there and install a premium technology like a Eloqua, then you could be able to surface that and say, technology installed, I know it's this account because it's the golden record, and I can build messaging that is associated to that, and marketing and sales can look through the same prism of intentionality around that audience to drive real programs that are going to be the correct signals across the correct accounts for the practitioner to take action. I think where a lot of that falls short is if you start showing signals to sellers, and if those signals end up being false signals, you lose the trust of the field immediately, and you never get it back. And so in the absence of that integrity, those signals are relatively useless. A good example is Tesla just said they did a bunch of job postings in Mumbai. And that's like a huge signal that Tesla's going into Mumbai. And all of a sudden, you've got job postings that mean something is out there for you to take action on, but you would need Tesla to be that source of truth in your system of record. And in the absence of that being true, I don't know where to send these signals or who the account owner is to send these signals or how to get marketing to build programs that drive awareness in advance of taking action. And so I think you have to have that golden record or everything else falls flat.
One of the questions I feel like we haven't quite touched on is exactly how like AI is going to transform revenue operations.
Yeah.
Like, give us your sort of hot take into the future. Like, where is revenue operations going to go with this within this age of AI?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think, revenue operations tends to be a function today. I think we're going to see a lot of revenue operators. And I don't think it's just one team. I think we're going to democratize the access to building audiences at scale, building personalized messaging at scale, and then the execution of that. And if you think about like a simple example here, I need to go out and I need to build an audience. Henry just tasked me with going after one of our biggest competitive displacement programs. I'm sure everybody can relate to, I need to go and run a competitive displacement. And so it starts as a Slack, and then that Slack makes its way to me. And all of a sudden it's a team on a Slack of 9 people trying to figure out how we're going to go build this audience. We need these companies. They happen to be customers of ours, and they're using this competitor. I want this venture capital funding. I want to know the underlying technographic data. I want to know when they installed said technology. And then, oh, by the way, I need to take that information, which probably takes 2 weeks to come back at best. And I need to then load it and make sure it's in a really clean place for the marketing team to take action on. Then I need to go and build content that is relevant for this audience. And then I need to build these sequences. And then I need to go and execute. And RevOps manages a lot of that work cross-functionally, whether it's with the engineering and data team, whether it's with some of the Salesforce admins, whether it's with marketing and building the content. I think what we're going to see is this plethora of agents that are going to come in, and they're going to be accessing mastered, really clean data inside of a data lake that has, again, really clean data that the agents can go and pull that audience with the click of a button. And then you're going to have a content agent, and that content agent is going to understand the underlying attributes of the demographics that you pulled from an audience, and they're going to produce really rich, insightful information and context that's important for your audience. And then they're going to be able to initiate these contextually relevant emails and call scripts that you can go on the offensive with. And what used to take probably 3 weeks to turn around is going to take a day to turn around. And I think a lot of that, which I'm really bullish on, is the launch of Go-to-Market Studio. And if you think about every company out there is looking to architect these audiences with automated access to rich, clean B2B intelligence. 100 million companies, 500 million contact attributes, and billions of signals, so they can then activate across the plethora of marketing channels and a UX that is conducive for a seller to work within. And so Go-to-Market Studio is going to have those agents. It's going to have that data lake. It's going to have all of the signal universe that we have access to. And it's going to be able to be done by revenue operators, not just revenue operations teams. And so the same way I think AI, to your question earlier, is going to create the first billion-dollar company from a solo founder on their own, I think we're going to see this really exciting movement of these go-to-market architects that are revenue operators that I think are going to only reinforce the excitement and the need for revenue operations type functions, but across sales leaders, across marketing leaders, across sales development leaders. It's going to really create access to create your own campaigns at scale and make them effective.
Yeah. I want to live in that future, so I can't wait. I think there's something really interesting that you sort of tied in there, which is we were talking about CRM and where does that go? And I think ultimately what I hear a lot of in the intersection that you're in is it's ultimately about centralization and mandating sort of that cleanliness of that hygiene. You talked about this golden record idea. That's critical, absolutely. But it's also then democratizing. It's giving access. So no matter what revenue generating activity you're responsible for, give you the access to be able to do that without a ton of technical background, without having to throw it over the fence or go to someone else, like being able to own and drive revenue within your patch or for whatever reason, right, you have been tasked with within your organization is something that we should be able to do. And so I think that shift is going to be really interesting to watch from an organizational perspective. So if the tech is there, then what happens to the org will be really interesting, I think, movie to watch.
Yeah, I agree. I think the risk, and we've seen it play out time and time again. And again, I think it was this transition to profitability where people really were forced to inspect their tech stack. People ran at this with a myopic shortcut mindset of, I'm just going to basically set it and forget it with this like tool. And what they failed to understand is that the underlying data underneath what powered the tool was fundamentally flawed. And so, I've got this great sort of landscape of a view across all of these emerging technologies, and they're really point solutions, and they were purpose built, but they're built on top of a data set that is fundamentally flawed, garbage in, garbage out. And so if you don't take the hard road of fixing your foundational data set, then everything you spit out is garbage. And so I think a lot of organizations take the shortcut of, well, we'll just buy another tool to solve a problem that fundamentally isn't going to solve the problem. But the conversation we had earlier around like having the confidence and the belief, having done it before, of saying we're going to start over, but we're going to fix the data foundation, or we're going to partner with a company that does that for us, is the only way this works. And what's surprising is you actually need less tools when you fix the data foundation.
I guess you commented on this sort of emergence of this go-to-market architect.
Yeah.
And I feel like we've also talked a little bit about it's like potentially start over, right? Like rebuilding your tooling landscape is probably where we're at this point in our sort of progression in go-to-market. Then it's fixing the data foundation on top of that or as part of that, and then democratizing access to that data to your revenue operators. In sort of fixing the data and re-architecting from the ground up, like what other sort of tools or solutions do you think start to come to mind that are critical for go-to-market architects to use?
Yeah.
Other than Studio, I guess.
Yeah. I think tools is a byproduct of understanding the processes for the jobs to be done. I think sometimes the processes don't get defined. That could be CPQ as an example. That could be the onboarding process for customers and all the information that happened before they became a customer, and capturing that information and making it more seamless and elegant for the onboarding experience so that you don't go in and say, so-and-so, I'm your customer success manager, tell me about your goals. That's a terrible experience. And so you've really got to define the processes. Then you can build the tools, and then you can snap to the data. I think, I've always said this, is I think that it is the responsibility and obligation of every CRO and every sales leader to architect their own sales process. And I think the same is now becoming true. We talked about this earlier, the democratization of revenue operators becoming these go-to-market architects. And I think that that's only going to take off in terms of the opportunity for everybody to be able to architect their own place, their own audiences, their own success, their own failures. But similar to the conversation we had around how different learning styles are creating equanimity across this vast landscape of opportunity, I think that this concept of go-to-market architects is very similar in terms of creating that same level of access that has been siloed to revenue operations teams or to marketing automation teams. And so I think this emergence of this new operator, this go-to-market architect, is coming. And I've seen a lot of debate around go-to-market engineer and go-to-market architect. And I don't think they're engineers. I think, we've had a number of conversations internally where if you're an engineer and you're a true engineer, you kind of live in the CIO organization. There's a community, there's a collective genius, there's career development opportunities. Engineers should live with engineers. I think that's true. But I don't know that how many of these architects, a sales leader, a RevOps leader, they're not engineers, they're architects. And I think that the engineer is an interesting concept, but I think it falls short of truly architecting your blueprint for success. And then these tools and these processes only democratize the speed and the access on which you can execute your architecture plan. And that's really cool.
I really like what you said there. I feel like, and for those of you who follow me on LinkedIn, you know I'm pretty active in this type of conversation that's happening broadly in the market. But I think, Andrew, what I haven't heard, which I feel like you just distilled for me, is like, if you're a go-to-market architect, you have ownership and access to architect sort of your operation or that process end to end. And so that is the data, the tooling, the process, the impact, and the outcomes that you're gonna be responsible for. And in that, you are truly architecting your sort of own future operational process.
Totally.
And that's a real departure from what we're doing today, right? And a real departure from, I think, engineering a single process or a single solution that works for the entire organization.
100%. There's a great example, actually, it's sort of a sad example, but it's a great example. At DocuSign, during COVID, which was a bananas time for us, it was really crazy, the amount of inbound demand when people couldn't go into the office or couldn't sign different things. And a really good use case of why I think go-to-market architects is the right way to think about this is one of the fastest growing segments for us was funeral homes, because everybody needed access to sign agreements, but they couldn't come in to necessarily sign those agreements. And the team that was seeing this was beholden to essentially everybody sort of prioritizing that funeral homes were going to be the audience that they wanted to go architect these go-to-market plays around. And it became a prioritization issue of like, well, we've got all these other audiences that we need to create. But imagine a world where you're not beholden to anybody. You are a revenue operator. You're a go-to-market architect that can build these audiences, build this content with these agents, and execute turnkey. It's just an accelerator in terms of the revenue growth, and you're not beholden to anybody else. And so again, I think architect is those that build the blueprints and the design of the plays you want to run. Engineering is doing a lot of the plumbing. The great news with all these new tools, most notably Go-to-Market Studio, is that it's not engineering dependent. It's actually architecture. It's architecture ready and architecture first.
Yeah. We've got only a couple minutes left. We're going to go quick rapid fire here.
You talked to my agent about this, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Right. You talking your talent agent or your go-to-market agent?
Both.
Because you got to clarify.
That's fair.
Right?
That's fair.
So first, a lot of people have been asking. We got a lot of questions on the chat. You're one of Head Royce's finest. What was the batting average, home runs, and RBI senior year?
I did go to Head Royce, school in Oakland. My batting average was .625.
Home runs?
6.
RBIs?
I think it was, I don't know, you have to talk to my agent, maybe in the 30s, 40s, 50s.
Okay, so you're just knocking singles around, just kind of making your way around.
Thanks, Ben.
I'm really proud of you.
This is our motif question we ask it of all of our guests. Who is the smartest person you know, and what did you learn from them?
Yeah, this one's probably a bit more personal. I was thinking about this. There's a lot of smart people out there, but there was a moment, call it like 12 years ago, and we were at our SKO at Responsys. And there's a company called Life is Good. I don't know if you know it. It's a Boston-based company. It's a great tagline. And the CEO of the company comes out on stage, and he's barefoot, which is always hilarious. And he's throwing Frisbees around. And it was really fun. And what he said, though, in that moment, which really resonated, and so I don't know if he's the smartest person in the room, but it's really true wisdom that has resonated with me, is he said, none of you have to be here. You all get to be here. And it was during a time when we had a son who was in the NICU for a long time. And I always thought about going to the NICU of being like, I have to go to the NICU to visit my son. And it completely transformed that moment in time. I get to go see my son in the NICU, and I get to be here with you two, and I get to do this great job every single day. And so I think that moment, that wisdom that has completely shaped a lot of how I approach my life and trying to be present and all those things, which is you get to do all these things. And so I think that's probably some of the biggest wisdom I've been shared.
I really appreciate all of your time. I've learned so much from you. We all have. And I think a lot of the market has learned from you. And I think you've helped set the tone around what it looks like to be sort of a holistic approach to business, right? It's not just about like getting this stuff done and making money. It's empowering the team, giving back, and truly you've inspired, I think, a lot of us.
Thanks, Ben. I appreciate it. Thanks, Millie, for having me. This was really fun.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the ZoomInfo Labs podcast.
With new episodes dropping every Monday and Thursday, subscribe to the show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me and Ben on LinkedIn and visit ZoomInfo.com/labs to get in touch.